picture this scenario, right? You wake up in the morning.
Oh, yeah. We all have the feeling.
Yeah, maybe the alarm went off a little too early. It's dragging you out of deep sleep. You roll out of bed, and your lower back feels kind of stiff from the mattress.
Your shoulders are completely tight from, however you contorted yourself during the night.
Exactly. And you just sort of groan your way into the bathroom. Now, you probably should stretch. Maybe you have this mental bookmark for a 10-minute mobility routine you saw online or something.
But who actually has the time for that? You just want your coffee.
Right, you just need coffee. But now, look over at your dog. Or, your cat, if you're a cat person. Watch what they do when they wake up.
It's totally different.
It really is. They rise from their bed and they don't look around for a foam roller. They don't, check their fitness tracker to see their sleep score.
No, they just plant their paws forward, drop their chest toward the floor, and execute this incredible, slow, complete full body stretch.
Yeah, it is a movement that literally seems to take over their entire being, right? It travels from the tip of the nose all the way down the spine to the tail.
It's a full wave. It's built in.
And it looks almost religious, honestly, the level of commitment they give to it. The mouth opens wide into this massive yawn, the spine arches, and you can see this visible rolling wave travel right through their muscles.
And then, just like that, it's over.
Yeah, they shake themselves off, they look at you, and they are instantly 100% ready for anything. If a squirrel runs past the window right then, they are at a full sprint in a microsecond.
They didn't do a dynamic warm-up.
Right. They didn't do 3 sets of 10 reps to activate their glutes or periodize a training block. They just ran their built-in physiological software, and boom, they are fully operational.
And that very simple everyday moment with a pet, that's actually the catalyst for the entire paradigm shift we are exploring today.
It really is. Because today's deep dive is going to completely dismantle what you think you know about physical training. We are talking about why you hit frustrating plateaus in the gym and how your body is fundamentally designed to move.
We are pulling all of this from an incredibly dense, just profound essay titled The Yawn That Changed Everything. It's by Monya Gorelik.
Right. He's the creator of ISAI, right?
Yeah, the Israeli Science and Art of Integrity. Gorelik is basically proposing a framework that bridges biomechanics, neuroscience, and deep evolutionary biology all together.
Which is wild.
It really is. He's spent 4 decades developing the system called Kinegenesis. It maps out how our bodies actually function in motion, which is very different from how the modern fitness industry tells us they function.
So the mission of this deep dive today is to figure out how to unlock that ancient evolutionary software that we all still have inside us.
Because we all have it. It's the inborn pattern of yawning and pandiculation.
Pandiculate, that's the technical term for that deep involuntary animal stretch, right?
Exactly. And learning how to consciously access it can fundamentally change the way you train and just, well, the way you live.
I was reading through this source material and I kept coming back to this analogy. Our modern approach to fitness, it's like trying to program a state-of-the-art supercomputer by plugging a rusty 1980s typewriter into it.
That is a perfect way to look at it.
Right, because we are trying to force these highly complex ancient bodies to move using these rigid mechanical instructions.
Yeah.
And we completely ignore the brilliant operating system that is already running flawlessly in the background.
And that operating system is deeply, deeply tied to our nervous system.
Yeah.
So to understand why we need to access it, we actually have to start with the most universal problem in any physical discipline.
The plateau.
Exactly. Whether you are just a casual gym goer or a professional dancer or an Olympic weightlifter, you will eventually hit a plateau.
You put in the work, you see this nice linear progress for weeks, maybe months, and then suddenly nothing. Your progress just flatlines.
And the cultural assumption, what every magazine and personal trainer tells you, is that a plateau is a muscular failure.
Right. The logic is always that your muscles have adapted to the load. So you need more weight or more volume. You hear muscle confusion all the time.
I've had to shock the system, yeah.
Yeah, shock the system. But Gorelik's essay argues something entirely different, which is fascinating. He says the plateau isn't a muscular limit at all.
No. It is a neurochemical limit.
Which is a profound shift in perspective. Like, if we view the plateau as a neurochemical failure, that means the hardware, the muscle tissue itself is totally fine.
Yes, the tissue is ready. It is the software that has stopped responding.
Yeah.
The brain is just no longer engaged in the same way.
So how does the source break down the mechanics of this?
Well, it dives into the research of neuroscientist Wolfram Schultz. He spent years mapping the precise function of dopamine in the brain.
Okay, we need to pause here and course correct some major cultural misunderstandings about dopamine because we constantly talk about dopamine as the pleasure chemical.
Right, the reward candy.
Yeah, you eat a piece of chocolate, you get a dopamine hit, you scroll through social media and see a notification, dopamine. We treat it like it just equals feeling good.
But Schultz's experiments, especially his work with primates, revealed that this popular narrative is just fundamentally flawed. Dopamine is not a reward for pleasure.
Wait, really? Not at all.
No, it is a mechanism for tracking prediction and uncertainty.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Basically, your dopamine neurons fire the hardest. Not when something good happens, but when something good happens that you did not fully expect. It is the molecule of prediction error.
I want to make sure we really nail the mechanics of this for you listening because it's so critical. So let's say I decide I'm going to learn how to juggle. My brain has literally no idea how to do it.
Zero predictive model.
Right. So the outcome of throwing 3 balls in the air is completely uncertain. When I managed to actually catch one ball, my brain didn't expect that success, so it releases this massive spike of dopamine.
Yes, exactly. And that dopamine spike says, hey, pay close attention to what your hands just did. That was surprisingly good.
It's flagging it for memory.
Exactly. It drives the consolidation of the motor memory. The brain is highly incentivized to figure out the puzzle. It creates a state of active, highly engaged investigation.
The source cites the psychophysiologist Vadim Rotenberg here, right?
Yes, Rotenberg termed this state search activity.
See, activity.
Right. It's an active, ongoing behavior in a situation where the outcome is uncertain, and it requires constant real-time feedback between your actions and the results.
And what's wild is that Rotenberg found that being in the state of search activity is actually incredibly healthy for the organism.
Oh, it's one of the most powerful, highly protective physiological states we can possibly inhabit.
Wow.
When an animal, or a human, is actively engaged in trying to solve a physical puzzle with an uncertain outcome, the nervous system regulates stress hormones beautifully.
So it's not a stressful panic.
Not at all. Immune function optimizes, and the organism just remains in a state of high vitality and readiness.
Okay, so applying this to the gym, I start a new weightlifting program. I'm learning a complex movement, like, say, a barbell squat. My brain is in high alert search activity.
Because the outcome is uncertain.
Right. I'm trying to figure out where my hips go, how to brace my core, how to keep the bar over my midfoot. My dopamine is firing heavily on every successful rep because of that prediction error, and I feel highly engaged. I'm loving the gym.
But then, 3 months later.
Yeah, 3 months later, I get really good at barbell squats.
And this is where the system works against you. Because the brain is, at its core, an efficiency engine. It's a prediction machine.
Right.
Once you practice the squat enough times, the movement becomes familiar. The brain solves the puzzle. It builds an incredibly accurate predictive model of exactly what will happen when you unrack that barbell.
So the uncertainty drops to 0.
Yes. And because the uncertainty drops to 0, the prediction error drops to 0. Consequently, the dopamine signaling just falls off a cliff.
But hold on, there's a paradox here that the source brings up. And it uses the work of Nikolai Bernstein, the famous Soviet pioneer of biomechanics.
Bernstein is crucial here.
Right, because Bernstein proved that we never actually repeat a movement identically. He coined the phrase repetition without repetition. Like every time I do a squat, my muscle fibers fire in slightly different sequences, my balance shifts by a millimeter, maybe the temperature of the room affects my joints.
The territory is always slightly different.
Yeah. So if my body is constantly having to solve these micro adjustments in real time, why does the brain think the puzzle is solved? Why does the uncertainty disappear if the movement is never actually the same twice?
That is the absolute genius of Bernstein's model of motor control layers. He discovered that as a skill forms, the real-time, moment-to-moment solving of the physical problem migrates downward. Downward in the hierarchy of your nervous system. When you first learn the squat, the conscious leading level of your cortex is actively managing everything. It's front and center.
Okay.
But as you gain proficiency, the conscious brain hands the micro-solving down to older, automatic background levels of the nervous system.
Oh, so it offloads the processing power.
Exactly. The micro-corrections are absolutely still happening. Your cerebellum and your spinal cord are working furiously to adjust to those millimeter shifts in balance, but your conscious mind is no longer involved.
So the conscious level just checks out.
Right. And the conscious level, which is the level your dopamine reward system is primarily tracking for motivation, no longer faces any felt uncertainty. It considers the problem completely solved.
The search continues in the dark, but the conscious search ends. And that is the exact moment the plateau hits. The discovery loop closes.
Yes, the action that used to feel like this thrilling, engaging investigation now just feels like rote labor. A chore.
So the neurochemical plateau means you haven't hit a physical limit. Your brain has just automated the process and stopped rewarding you for it. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt like your gym routine has become this soul-sucking grind, even though you are diligently adding weight and doing the work, this is the biological mechanism behind that feeling.
It's so validating to understand that. And this biological mechanism also reveals a really profound flaw in modern fitness culture.
Especially when it comes to gym machines, right?
Exactly. The invention of the gym machine. A chest press machine, or a leg extension machine, is specifically engineered to hold a physical situation still.
It isolates a muscle.
Yes, it forces the body into a fixed path of motion, and it purposefully removes all environmental variables.
Think about sitting on a leg extension machine for a second. You slide into the seat, you put your shins under the padded bar, and you straighten your legs. Compare the complexity of that to walking up a rocky, uneven hiking trail.
Night and day.
Right. On the trail, your ankle has to adjust to the angle of a rock, your hips shift to maintain balance, your core braces against a gust of wind. You are managing dozens of unpredictable variables. But on the machine, you are locked in.
The machine removes all the degrees of freedom. That's a biomechanical term for the number of independent movements a system can make.
And managing those degrees of freedom is exactly what the human nervous system evolved to do.
Precisely. When you sit down at that machine, there is a very brief, shallow learning phase where you adjust to the pad, find your grip, settle into the groove. But because the machine has removed all the variables, the search activity is exhausted almost immediately.
Because there's nothing left to search for.
Right. By standardizing the exercise, we are literally building the neurochemical plateau into the very foundation of the workout. We ensure the dopamine dries up far faster than it would in open, free movement.
Okay, now, if I put my personal trainer hat on for a second, my immediate instinct to solve this dopamine drop is to say, okay, the brain is bored. We need to introduce new uncertainty.
Which leads to the circus tricks.
Right. I'm going to add a bunch of crazy, novel exercises to the program. Tomorrow, we are doing squats on a Bosu ball while holding kettlebells upside down. We are going to shock the muscles because that introduces prediction error. So that should bring the dopamine back, right?
It does bring a temporary spike in dopamine, absolutely. But it is a trap.
A trap.
Yes. The source introduces a critical concept from sports science here called negative transfer of training.
Negative transfer. Right.
Piling on random novelty just to chase a neurochemical high only postpones the inevitable. Eventually, you will learn how to balance on the Bosu ball, and the plateau will return.
Right. The brain will solve that puzzle, too.
But more importantly, throwing uncoordinated random exercises at the nervous system can secretly degrade the original skills you were trying to build.
Let's look under the hood of that. How does a new exercise actually harm an old one?
Well, the brain maps movement through coordination patterns.
Yeah.
If you take a highly refined skill, let's say a martial arts strike, or a perfect golf swing, and you suddenly start doing heavy, rigid, isolated shoulder presses on a machine to build strength, you are teaching the nervous system conflicting motor patterns.
Because the machine movement is so unnatural.
Exactly. The rigid, isolated tension of the machine contradicts the fluid, full-body kinetic chain required for the golf swing. So, quietly behind the scenes, the nervous system starts to blend these patterns, and the precise coordination of your actual skill begins to erode.
Wow. It's a double bind. The standard exercises lose their reward and become a chore, but adding random novel exercises introduces negative transfer and wrecks your coordination.
We need a way out of this trap.
Yeah, we need a physical situation where the territory is never the same twice, so the dopamine never drops. But that also completely respects the fundamental coordination of the human body, avoiding that negative transfer.
And to find a movement where the territory is never the same twice, we have to look past the artificial exercises invented in the last 100 years.
We have to look deep into the ancient architecture of the body.
Yes. We have to look at our evolutionary history.
Which brings us to this incredible concept that Gorelik calls the private zoo inside us. I love this imagery so much. This is the core of his Kinegenesis framework.
It's an evolutionary fractal account of biomechanics.
Right. He breaks down the human skeleton into 6 distinct evolutionary layers of motor control.
And this maps perfectly back onto Nikolai Bernstein again. Bernstein argued that motor control in the brain is built in layers that correspond directly to our evolutionary age. The older, deeper, more primal levels of control operate underneath the newer, more conscious levels.
And kinegenesis takes that neurological concept and maps it directly onto the physical joints of the skeleton.
Exactly. There are 6 functional levels, and each one is tied to a specific era of our evolution.
I really want to walk through these layers carefully because conceptualizing this actually changed the way I feel sitting in my chair right now.
It changes everything about how you feel your body.
So if we start from the deepest, absolute, oldest level of movement architecture in the human body, where are we?
We are at the ribs.
The ribs?
The rib cage represents the most ancient, amoeba-like, undifferentiated form of whole-body coordination. Before there were limbs, before there was even a complex spine, there was simple, rhythmic pulsation.
Expansion and contraction.
Yes, the primal core of our movement is this respiratory rhythm.
So the amoeba lives in the ribs. That makes sense. What is the next layer out?
Moving up the evolutionary ladder, we arrive at the vertebral joints of the spine and the neck. This is the fish level.
The fish.
Right. When vertebrates first evolved in the oceans, they propelled themselves not with limbs, but with the axial wave. That's a side-to-side, undulating curvature of the spine.
So when I twist my torso to look behind me, or when a swimmer does the butterfly stroke, they are heavily relying on that fish layer. Okay, then we finally start moving out from the central axis.
Right. From the spine, the nervous system branches out to control the shoulders and the hips. This is the amphibian level.
The amphibian, so this is getting out of the water.
Exactly. This represents the profound evolutionary moment when that undulating spinal wave was married to primitive limbs, allowing a creature to pull itself out of the mud and onto land. The shoulders and hips coordinate to drag the body forward against gravity.
So the amphibian is in the shoulders and hips. Got it. Moving further out the limb.
We reach the elbows and the knees. This represents the reptile level.
Reptile. Okay.
As creatures move further onto land, the limbs needed to support the body more efficiently against the constant downward pull of gravity. The joints articulated to lift the belly off the ground.
To really stand up a bit more. Okay, and then past the reptile.
We reach the wrists and the ankles. This is the mammalian level.
The
Mammals require highly advanced shock absorption, springing ability, and adaptability to complex terrain. The intricate bones of the wrists and ankles provide that dynamic suspension system.
And finally, at the very furthest endpoints of the body.
The fingers. This is the ape level, the absolute pinnacle of fine dexterity, tool manipulation, and highly specialized environmental interaction.
So we have the amoeba in the ribs, the fish in the spine, the amphibian in the shoulders and hips, the reptile in the elbows and knees, the mammal in the wrists and ankles, and the ape in the fingers.
That is the private zoo.
Now, the mind-blowing part of this framework is that this order is not just a fun trivia fact for a biology test. This evolutionary sequence dictates every single movement you make today.
It absolutely does.
Control flows from the center outwards, right? Proximal control, meaning the joints closer to the center of your body, always precedes and supports distal control, the joints further away.
Precisely. To give a concrete example of this, think about you, the listener, right now. If you are sitting in a car and you move your finger to tap the steering wheel, or you are holding your phone and your thumb moves to scroll the screen, you feel like you are just moving your finger.
Right, it feels like an isolated action.
But biomechanically, you are not. To stabilize that tiny, precise movement of the ape in your finger, your nervous system must simultaneously engage the suspension of the mammal in your wrist, the support of the reptile in your elbow, the power of the amphibian in your shoulder, the stability of the fish in your spine, and the foundational rhythm of the amoeba in your ribs.
Wow.
You are using the entire evolutionary zoo all at once just to scroll on a screen.
That total integration is what the source calls the meta-network organization of the body. And Gorelik points out 3 very specific defining qualities of this meta-network. It is fractal, it is hyper, and it is meta.
Yes, those 3 terms are essential.
Let's break down exactly what those terms mean in this context, because understanding these 3 words is really the key to escaping that plateau we talked about.
Let's start with fractal. In mathematics, a fractal is a structure where a pattern repeats itself at progressively smaller or larger scales.
Like a fern leaf.
A classic example, yes. You look at the whole leaf, and its shape is composed of smaller branches that look exactly like the whole leaf. And those branches are made of tiny fronds that also look exactly like the whole leaf.
So how is the human body fractal? I mean, we don't look like fern leaves.
We don't look like them externally, but functionally and neurologically, we are built the exact same way. The entire arm operates as a unified network. But within that arm, the forearm operates as its own self-contained subnetwork with similar tension properties.
Oh, I see.
And within that, the hand is a smaller network, and the finger is an even smaller one. The principles of tension, leverage, and fascial elasticity operate identically at every single scale of the body.
Okay, repeating patterns at every scale. That is fractal. Now, what does it mean that the network is hyper?
Hyper implies instantaneous, simultaneous connectivity. These evolutionary layers from the ribs out to the fingers, they do not operate in isolation. They are hyper-connected.
So they talk to each other instantly.
Exactly. When a force is introduced to the hand, the tension is instantaneously distributed across the entire web of the body all the way down to the toes. It acts as one single, continuous adaptive system.
And the third quality, meta.
Meta refers to the evolutionary layering we just discussed. The entire system was built layer upon layer over hundreds of millions of years.
Like geological strata.
Right. Each new evolutionary level was embedded inside the next, building its capabilities completely upon the foundations of the older ones. The ape cannot function without the amphibian underneath it.
So we have a fractal hyper-meta network, and the massive paradigm shift here is that when you understand you are operating a system that's incredibly complex, you realize that the way we culturally think about controlling our bodies is entirely backwards.
Completely backwards.
You cannot consciously dictate movement in a system like this. The author states explicitly, you don't control movement, you organize the conditions so that movement emerges.
That distinction, organizing conditions versus controlling, cannot be overstated. Conscious control is what a robot does. It calculates angles and applies discrete amounts of force to specific motors.
But we aren't robots.
Emergence is what biological life does.
The analogy that made this click for me is the act of cracking a heavy bullwhip. If you hold a 10-foot braided leather whip, it is physically impossible to consciously control every single inch of the leather as it moves through the air. You don't tell the middle of the whip to bend, and you don't tell the tip of the whip to snap.
No, you can't micromanage a whip.
Right. What do? You move the handle. You create the initial physical condition at the base, and because of the physical structure of the whip, a wave of energy emerges. That wave travels the entire length, accelerating and doing the work at the tip perfectly.
That is a phenomenal analogy, and it maps directly onto the biological concept of the axial wave.
The axial wave.
Yes. When we go back to the image of the dog waking up in the morning and stretching from nose to tail, what you're actually seeing is a three-dimensional, helical wave of energy propagating through the spine and the fascial network of the body.
So it's not just a flat 2D stretch.
No, it's helical, like a spiral. And it is the exact same underlying pattern that propelled the earliest fish through the primordial oceans.
It's the body's biological version of the whip.
Exactly. You do not produce the axial wave by consciously deciding to tighten your lower back muscles, then your latissimus dorsi, then your neck, in a sequential order. You cannot micromanage it.
You just move the handle.
You create the internal conditions, and the wave emerges. And when it emerges, force travels through the body completely, cleanly, without getting stuck or wasted in unnecessary muscular tension.
And this pattern isn't like a technique you have to go to a specialized seminar to learn. It is hard-coded into our brainstem.
Everyone has it.
Right. It is the involuntary reflex called pandiculation. Every single vertebrate on Earth does it. It's a systemic wave of tensing, expanding, and slowly releasing through the entire fascial web.
Humans do it too, usually in our unguarded private moments. Think about when you get up from a chair after sitting in front of a computer for 3 hours, or right before you slide into sleep.
Yeah, you just kind of contort.
Your body does something involuntary. You throw your arms out, your back arches, you yawn deeply. It feels colloquially like a stretch, but it is much deeper than pulling on a muscle.
It's a reset.
It is a neurological reset. It is the oldest software in your body booting up for a brief moment to clear out the accumulated static of your posture.
But this raises a huge practical question. If I am not a fish swimming in water, and I am not a dog on all fours, but a bipedal human standing upright, how does this invisible wave of energy actually translate into movement through space?
How does it manifest in human limbs?
Right. What does this ancient energy look like when it reaches my arms and legs?
This brings us to a concept Gorelik calls fish play.
Fish play.
Fish play is the universal foundational form of natural movement. It is the shape the axial wave takes when it expresses itself through human anatomy.
Okay, how do we visualize that?
To visualize it, imagine standing completely relaxed. You drop your arms so they hang dead at your sides. Now you begin to gently rotate your torso side to side. shifting your weight from foot to foot.
Just a loose rotation.
Right. You do not lift your arm with your shoulder muscles. You do not try to throw a punch. You just let the momentum of your turning torso swing your relaxed arm up into the air.
Okay, I can picture that. My hips turn, my torso twists, and my dead arm just flings up and outward.
Now, if you track the path that your relaxed hand traces in the empty air, it won't be a straight, rigid line. The momentum and the structure of your joints force the hand to trace a very specific three-dimensional curve.
What kind of curve?
It traces a single closed lobe. The hand rises up on one side, curves over gracefully at the top as it runs out of momentum, and then descends down the other side, returning back toward where it began.
Like a loop.
Yes, it is the exact sweeping path a fish makes with its tail when turning in the water.
And because we established that the body is fractal, this fish play form doesn't just happen at the macro level of the whole arm swinging, right?
Exactly right. If you zoom in, the forearm is tracing a smaller version of that exact same curving lobe around the elbow.
Oh, wow.
And if you zoom in further, the palm is tracing an even smaller version around the wrist. The form appears at every scale simultaneously.
That's the fractal nature of it.
And crucially, it happens on both sides of the body. As your right arm carves one lobe ascending, your left arm is carving the mirrored lobe descending. Together, these two continuous lobes compose the complete physical form.
You know, when I got to this part in the essay, my jaw physically dropped because the author points out that this form, these two perfectly interlocking continuous lobes, one rising while the other descends, carved by the natural, relaxed movement of the human body, is not a new discovery. We have all seen it before.
Yes.
It is the ancient yin-yang symbol.
It is a stunning historical connection, truly stunning.
We in the West, we generally view the yin-yang symbol, the circle with the two swirling teardrop shapes of light and dark, as purely abstract philosophy. A metaphor for the duality of nature, light and dark, masculine and feminine.
But Gorelik argues that it is not abstract at all.
No, it is quite literally a highly precise, ancient biomechanical drawing of the fish play form.
Thousands of years before the invention of modern biomechanics, someone observed the human body moving with absolute uninhibited efficiency in a state of deep relaxation, and they mapped the physical path that the limbs took through space.
The yin-yang is a map of the path of least resistance.
Gorelik writes that he didn't discover this by reading philosophy either. He found it by what he calls mapping the space.
What does that mean?
He treated the yin-yang symbol as a physical object, traced it with his hands, and searched his nervous system for the path of least muscular effort. And what naturally fell out was the fish play movement.
So the form isn't a stylistic choice.
No, it is forced into existence by gravity, leverage, and the structural limits of our joints. It's the same way a hanging metal chain naturally forms a perfect curve called a catenary.
But we have to be very careful to clarify what kind of form this is, because when people hear the word path or form, they imagine a rigid train track. They think their hand has to follow an invisible laser line through the air perfectly, or they are doing it wrong.
And that's a misunderstanding we have to correct.
Let's explain the rubber sheet analogy, because that makes it so much clearer.
In topology, which is a branch of mathematics, you can study shapes drawn on a highly stretchable rubber sheet. If you draw the fish play form, the interlocking lobes on this rubber sheet, you can grab the edges of the rubber and pull.
Okay, so you're stretching the sheet.
You can stretch the form out so it's really long and thin. You can compress it so it's squat and wide. You can twist it. But as long as you don't tear the rubber, the fundamental topological identity of the shape remains exactly the same.
So it's the same form, just distorted.
Exactly. The sequence of acceleration, curvature, and deceleration is perfectly conserved, no matter how much you distort the medium.
And why does the human body need to act like a rubber sheet?
Because a living creature has to interact with a highly unpredictable, dynamic environment. You are never throwing a baseball, or reaching for a falling glass off a table, or slipping a punch in the exact same spatial coordinates twice.
Right. The world is chaotic.
The rubber sheet adaptability of fish play means the fundamental path of least effort can infinitely morph. It can elongate, compress, or twist based on whatever the chaotic environment demands of you in that millisecond.
The underlying efficiency is conserved, but the specific physical expression is totally free and spontaneous.
Exactly.
Okay, so we know what the optimal path of movement looks like. But to truly understand why the fish play form requires the least amount of muscular effort, we have to talk about mathematics. Specifically, the mathematical blueprint embedded in the bones of our limbs.
This is where it gets incredibly precise.
We are going deep into golden ratio biomechanics.
The golden ratio, which is numerically expressed as roughly 1 to 1.618, is incredibly famous for appearing throughout the natural world.
Yeah, you hear about it a lot.
It governs the spiral growth of a nautilus shell, the packing arrangement of seeds in the center of a sunflower, even the spiral arms of galaxies. But it is not just a symbol of aesthetic beauty. In physics, it is nature's signature of optimal mechanical organization and energy distribution.
And this mathematical ratio exists in the human arms and legs. But the source points out a major historical misconception here. For centuries, anatomists and scientists looked for the golden ratio in the human body by taking tape measures to dry skeletons.
Which was their first mistake.
Right. They would measure the length of individual bones, like the humerus bone in the upper arm, and compare it to the radius bone in the forearm. And they usually failed to find the 1 to 1.618 ratio perfectly. So many concluded it was a myth.
They failed because they were measuring the wrong thing. Human movement is not dictated by dry, isolated bones sitting on an autopsy table. Movement is dictated by living, interconnected functional segments.
Explain the difference. What are the 3 functional segments of the human arm?
If we look at how the body actually moves, the first functional segment is not just the upper arm bone. It is the scapula, your shoulder blade, functioning together with the upper arm as a single mechanical unit.
So the shoulder blade and the humerus are one team.
Yes, that entire mass acts as the first lever. The second functional segment is the forearm, and the third functional segment is the palm of the hand.
Okay.
When you measure the functional leverage of these 3 segments in a living system, they stand in exact golden ratio proportions to one another.
So the mass and leverage of the scapula plus upper arm stands in a 1 to 1.618 ratio to the forearm, which stands in a 1 to 1.618 ratio to the palm.
Yes.
And what is the actual mechanical benefit of our limbs being engineered to this specific universal math?
It allows for a physical phenomenon called self-annihilating inertial motion.
Self-annihilating inertial motion. That sounds incredibly intense, like a sci-fi weapons system or something. Break down the physics for us. What does self-annihilating momentum actually mean, and what does it feel like in the body?
To understand it, think about a typical, culturally trained movement. Imagine a boxer who has been taught to throw a very rigid, muscular, linear punch.
Like a stiff jab.
Right. When they decide to strike, their brain fires the triceps and shoulder muscles to forcefully push the fist forward. They generate a lot of kinetic energy. But if they miss the target, what happens to all that energy?
I mean, if nothing stops it, their arm would just snap right out of the elbow socket.
Exactly. So, to prevent the joint from hyperextending, the brain has to simultaneously fire opposing muscles, the biceps and the back muscles, to act as biological brakes.
So they have to break their own punch.
Yes. The boxer spends a massive amount of metabolic energy to start the movement, and then has to spend an equally massive amount of energy to forcefully stop it. You are literally fighting your own body.
You are stepping on the gas pedal and the brake pedal of your car at the exact same time. It's exhausting just thinking about it.
Now, contrast that with a limb moving fluidly along the curving fish play path, guided by the mathematics of the golden ratio. Imagine a pendulum made of 3 linked segments.
Okay, visualizing the pendulum.
The massive first segment, the shoulder and upper arm, initiates the movement. Because it is connected via the golden ratio, it perfectly transfers its kinetic energy into the lighter second segment, the forearm.
So the energy flows down.
The forearm accelerates dramatically, while the upper arm slows down. The forearm then transfers its energy into the tiny third segment, the hand, which accelerates like a bullet.
The whip effect again.
Yes. But here is where the golden ratio performs magic. Because the proportions of mass and length are exactly 1 to 1.618, as the limb reaches full natural extension along that curving path, the transfer of kinetic energy matches the natural dissipation curve of the joint's connective tissue.
Wait, say that again.
The momentum of the smaller segment is perfectly counterbalanced by the joint reaction forces of the larger segment behind it. The chain naturally terminates its own whiplash.
So the energy just runs out of track exactly at the moment of full extension. Like a wave crashing on a beach and gently rolling back without you having to build a concrete wall to stop it.
Precisely. There is 0 muscular braking required. You do not have to fire your biceps to stop your punch. The physical proportions of your limb, moving in the proper trajectory, do all the deceleration work for you automatically. It is a state of effortless efficiency.
Okay, so we have laid out the blueprint here. We have the ancient evolutionary layers of the meta-network, we have the fish play paths, and we have the golden ratio math that makes those paths effortless. But here is the massive roadblock.
There's always a catch.
Right. We said earlier that pandiculation, this perfect wave that resets the body and clears the plateau, is an involuntary reflex. It belongs to the autonomic nervous system.
Yes, it does.
I can't just forcefully decide to involuntarily stretch. That is a paradox. It's like trying to consciously force yourself to sneeze. So how do we actually initiate this?
You're entirely correct. You cannot command the autonomic nervous system with your conscious will. What you can do, however, is organize the physical conditions so perfectly that the older parts of the brain recognize the cue, and the reflex takes over on its own.
You set the stage.
Right. Gorelik refers to this physical cue as the gateway. Through decades of testing this in martial arts and physical therapy, he isolated that the most reliable physical gateway involves the precise alignment of three structures: the glottis, the chest, and the shoulders.
Let's walk the listener through this step by step. The first structure is the glottis. What is that and what are we doing with it?
The glottis is the opening between your vocal cords and the back of your throat.
Okay.
If you take a sharp, panic breath in, you can feel it tighten and close. But if you think about the onset of a real deep yawn, you can feel that space in the back of your throat widen and open up. It feels suspended.
Oh, yeah, I can feel that.
The breath isn't being sucked aggressively into the lungs. It feels like it is dropping in effortlessly from somewhere deep in the belly.
So the throat opens gently. What is the second structure?
The chest. The sternum lifts very slightly, expanding the rib cage. And this leads immediately into the third structure, the shoulders.
Lifting the shoulders.
No, you want the shoulder girdle to expand outward, feeling broad.
Hmm.
Crucially, this is not a tense muscular shrug pulling the shoulders up toward the ears. It is a lateral expansion, as if the collarbones are widening to make room for the lifted chest.
Okay, so open glottis, slightly lifted chest, widened shoulders. But the text is incredibly clear that you cannot just mechanically imitate these three physical movements and expect a result.
It's not a magic pose.
Right. If I just fake a yawn, puff my chest out like a pigeon, and pull my shoulders back, the deep reflex won't trigger. The system is too smart to be tricked by mechanical puppetry.
It requires a specific internal psychological state, which the author calls physical coloring.
Physical coloring. He borrowed that from acting, right?
Yes, from the legendary Russian acting teacher, Michael Chekhov. In the theater, if an actor just performs the outward, mechanical actions of crying, scrunching their face, squeezing out a tear, making sobbing noises, without any internal emotional life, the audience instantly recognizes it as fake.
It just feels empty and inert.
But if the actor organizes their inner emotional quality, the physical coloring of grief or joy, a true, unforced physical response is invited out of the body. The body generates its own truth.
So in approaching the gateway, you aren't manufacturing the stretch. You are organizing the throat, chest, and shoulders with a sincere inner invitation, a quiet readiness, and then you wait.
You're essentially knocking politely on the door of the brainstem.
And when the brainstem recognizes that sincere signal, the involuntary mechanism engages. The door opens.
Sometimes it manifests as a massive yawn. Sometimes it's a deep, undulating spinal wave. Sometimes it's a sudden, intense stretching of the arms. But the conscious mind does not get to choose the form it takes.
The body decides.
The meta-network assesses the entire body, senses exactly where the tension is trapped, and decides what the system needs to do in that specific moment.
And how do you know if it actually worked? How does the listener know they didn't just accidentally fake a stretch?
You know, with a lot of shadow of a doubt, because of the neurochemical cascade that immediately follows the release. Gorelik calls this neurochemical event the pleasure flash.
The pleasure flash. It sounds a bit provocative, but the essay clarifies it isn't necessarily this dramatic, euphoric explosion. It can be a very quiet, profound, unmistakable sense of internal clarity and physical lightness.
It is the biological sensation of internal friction dropping to zero. From a physiological standpoint, the pleasure flash is an incredibly complex event.
What's happening under the hood?
Triggering the pandiculation reflex heavily activates the hypothalamus in the brainstem. It initiates a massive, immediate shift away from the sympathetic nervous system, your fight-or-flight stress state, and dumps you into the parasympathetic nervous system, your rest, digest, and repair state.
The source also mentions specific molecular pathways engaging here. Nitric oxide floods the vascular system, dilating blood vessels. Oxytocin pathways engage. The arousal and reward systems of the brain synchronize perfectly. It is a full-body, systemic reboot.
And this incredible physiological event brings us right back to the central problem we started the show with, the neurochemical plateau.
Yes.
Why does the pleasure flash never plateau? Why doesn't the dopamine reward dry up after you yawn 100 times, the way it dries up after you do 100 reps on a chest press machine?
Because the territory is never the same twice. This is the elegant solution to the whole problem. The internal state of your body's tension is totally unique every single day.
Always changing.
How you slept, the specific stress of a conversation you had at work, the way you carried your groceries yesterday, all of it creates a totally novel pattern of neurological noise in the meta-network.
Precisely. When you trigger the pandiculation response through the gateway, your brain genuinely has to engage in search activity to figure out where the trapped tension is hiding and where the axial wave needs to travel today to clear it.
The search is always authentic, the outcome is always slightly uncertain, and therefore the dopamine hit the reward of discovery never habituates. Your brain cannot get bored of its own internal complexity.
It is also vital to note a specific physical marker that accompanies the absolute peak of this experience. It is called the still point.
The still point.
At the very height of the yawn or the pendicular stretch, there is a natural, effortless pause in the breath. You're not holding your breath forcefully by clamping your throat shut. The neurological urge to breathe simply suspends itself quietly for a second or two.
In that silence, the nervous system gets completely perfectly quiet. Now, I want to pause here and address the skeptics. I want to advocate for the traditional gym rats who are listening to this.
Sure, let's hear it.
Couldn't I just achieve this same relaxation by forcefully contracting my muscles? If my shoulder is tight, couldn't I just squeeze my deltoid muscle as hard as I can for 10 seconds and then let it go? Doesn't the muscle have to relax after a hard contraction?
The source explicitly addresses this and warns heavily against it. A mechanical, isolated contraction without that inner physical coloring and without the wave traveling along the proper fish play path is nothing more than a local tonal reset.
A local tonal reset, what does that mean?
It might temporarily relieve a tiny bit of surface tension in that one specific muscle, but it is biologically inert. It does not trigger the brainstem.
So it's the difference between forcefully pushing a heavy locked door open with your shoulder and brute strength versus finding the key, turning the lock, and having the door swing wide open for you.
Exactly.
Without the pleasure flash and the systemic parasympathetic shift, you have not engaged the ancient software. You are still trapped in the modern, artificial, isolated operating system, fighting your own body.
Which leads us directly into the final and incredibly vital section of this deep dive. How do we take this quiet, involuntary reflex, the stretching of a dog, and turn it into a practical, dynamic training system?
Right, because if I am a martial artist or professional athlete or just someone who wants to be strong and capable in the world, I cannot just stand in the middle of the field yawning all day.
No, you need to move.
We have to bridge this biological reset into high-level physical performance. And the source introduces a specific mechanism for this: quasimetric contraction followed by PIR.
Let's define those terms clearly.
Okay, what is a quasimetric contraction?
A quasimetric contraction is a brief, intense engagement of the musculature, where the tension naturally rises and falls in slight waves. It mimics the organic rhythm of the pandiculation reflex.
So it is not a static, dead flex. You aren't clamping down as hard as you can and turning yourself into a rigid statue.
Yeah.
It's an intense muscular engagement, but it feels alive, breathing, and slightly variable.
Correct. And when you completely release that intense wave-like contraction, human physiology dictates that the nervous system enters a temporary state called post-isometric relaxation, or PIR.
PIR, okay.
For a few brief seconds after the release, your motor system quiets down completely, the excitability of the nerve pathways drops dramatically, and the nervous system lets go of all unnecessary background tone.
You contract intensely to force the deep systemic relaxation that immediately follows. But here's the catch, and where the whole theory synthesizes together. The source notes that PIR gives you deep relaxation and stillness.
Yes.
If you contract and then just stand there doing nothing, you feel incredibly relaxed. But the second you try to take a step or throw a punch or lift a heavy bag of soil, your nervous system panics and tenses right back up. You lose the relaxation the moment you move.
This is where the fish play paths become mandatory. The only way to keep that deep parasympathetic relaxation while your body is actually in motion is to move the limbs along the fish play trajectories.
The rubber sheet paths of least resistance. Because if you move along the golden ratio path, the energy perfectly dissipates, and the nervous system doesn't need to fire the muscular brakes.
Exactly. The two elements are entirely symbiotic. The quasimetric contractions give you the biological relaxation. The fish play trajectories allow you to carry that relaxation into complex, high-speed movement without breaking the state.
But if you mess up the path,
If you deviate from the natural fractal path, if you revert to a rigid, mechanical, linear movement, tension floods immediately back into the system to stabilize the joints, and you lose the benefit.
they hold each other up. You absolutely need the proper physical path to stay relaxed, and you need the deep internal relaxation to keep you from forcing yourself off the path.
Yes.
And when you combine them perfectly, you achieve a state that Gorelik calls MDR, maximum dynamic relaxation.
Maximum dynamic relaxation is frequently misunderstood, though.
Yeah.
It is not limpness.
You're not a wet noodle.
Exactly. You are not collapsing or acting lethargic. MDR is the exact, precise level of neuromuscular readiness that a given situation requires, no more, no less. Your biological tap is wide open, energy can flow instantly, but not a single drop of metabolic energy is wasted on unnecessary background tension.
The essay mentions a fascinating anecdote about this, where a Soviet sports psychologist was examining Gorelik, and looking at his physiological readouts, the psychologist thought Gorelik was in a state of deep clinical hypnosis because his resting tension was so incredibly low.
That's amazing.
But he wasn't hypnotized. He was fully awake, alert, and ready to strike with massive force. That is the reality of MDR. So practically speaking, how does a coach or an individual program this into their life? The methodology laid out is called the off-nano method.
Right, off-nano. Nano refers to the duration of the training stimulus. The pulses of physical activation are incredibly short. We are talking about 2 to 3 seconds of intense, quasimetric engagement, followed immediately by the release.
3 seconds. That goes against literally every time under tension bodybuilding rule published in the last 50 years.
Because the goal is entirely different. We are not trying to microscopically tear the muscle tissue to force aesthetic hypertrophy. We are trying to train the central nervous system.
Right.
And for the nervous system, frequency of the signal matters exponentially more than the duration of the signal. That is where the oft in off-nano comes in. Oft means often.
So you do it a lot.
You do these tiny, intense, deeply relaxed 3-second pulses frequently throughout your entire day, rather than cramming them into a grueling, exhausting 2-hour session at the gym.
Let's visualize this. Instead of blowing yourself out on a Tuesday evening doing endless sets of deadlifts, you do a 3-second intense fish play pulse while you're standing in the kitchen waiting for your coffee to brew in the morning.
Perfect.
You do another brief pandicular engagement when you stand up from your desk at 11 a.m. You weave the training directly into the fabric of your daily life.
And over time, by exposing the nervous system to this state constantly, the deep relaxation stops being a temporary fleeting window after the contraction. It becomes your new permanent baseline.
It rewrites the code.
You fundamentally rewrite the resting tone of your entire meta-network. You no longer start movements from a place of sticky, resistant effort. You start from a place of fluid readiness.
The text makes a very clear distinction between non-N training and on training here. Non-N stands for natural off-nano. That is the pure, unadulterated dog stretch. The genuine yawning, the unguided pandiculation, governed totally by the autonomic nervous system.
Right, that's the base.
On training, on the other hand, is when you purposefully apply those exact same internal principles to a specific external skill, like executing a judo throw, swinging a tennis racket, or lifting a heavy object. But there is a cardinal rule here. On training is only valid and safe if it stays firmly rooted in the on base.
The very moment your martial arts technique or your weightlifting form separates from that inborn source code, the moment you lose the internal physical coloring or deviate from the natural fish play path to force a result, it becomes just another artificial cultural system.
And the moment that happens, the neurochemical plateau will inevitably return.
Exactly.
Now, I want to address the elephant in the room regarding strength. Because when people hear words like relaxation, yawning, and effortless, they immediately equate that with physical weakness.
Oh, of course.
But the source tackles this misconception head-on with a fascinating detour into animal strength. Specifically, it debunks the chimpanzee myth.
It is one of the most pervasive myths in biology. For over a century, the popular story, repeated even in scientific and anthropological circles, was that a chimpanzee was 4 or 5 times stronger than a human being of similar size.
We have all heard that. We just assume they have magic, incredibly dense muscle fibers that make them biological superheroes.
But when researchers finally developed the technology to measure it accurately, the source cites a pivotal 2017 study by O'Neill and colleagues, they found the truth is incredibly modest.
What did they find?
Chimpanzee muscle tissue produces only about 1.35 times the maximum dynamic force of human muscle.
Just a 35% difference in the actual tissue. So where does that terrifying, seemingly superhuman strength we see in chimps actually come from?
It comes purely from physical organization. Conventional human training, influenced by machines, views the body as a linear kinetic chain. A line of rigid, isolated segments passing energy down the line, losing a little bit of force at every single joint due to friction and opposing muscle tension.
But the chimp doesn't do that.
The chimpanzee does not use a linear kinetic chain. The chimpanzee uses the completely open meta-network.
Because the chimpanzee hasn't ruined its operating system by sitting in ergonomic desk chairs and using rigid chest press machines for a decade.
Exactly. Their biological nodes in the meta-network are completely open and unblocked. When a chimp moves to pull a branch or strike, the axial wave propagates through their entire system with almost zero internal loss of force.
It's perfectly efficient.
The kinetic energy is not dissipated as heat or friction at the joints. It travels fully, cleanly, and concentrates entirely at the point of action.
So when the dog or the cat does its morning pandiculation, it isn't just stretching its muscles. It is mechanically resetting this entire network. It is actively opening all the fascial nodes that got compressed and blocked during sleep, reestablishing the unbroken transmission of force from the nose to the tail.
That is exactly what off-nano training aims to do for us humans.
It is not about building massive, isolated muscle bulk that requires immense energy to move. It is about the structural adaptation of the entire meta-network so we can transmit whatever force we already have like a perfect, unimpeded wave through water.
And as we discussed earlier, Gorelik does not just sit in an academic office and theorize about this. The ultimate test of any movement system, of any biological theory, is extreme stress.
Right.
He tests these principles in full contact fighting, training national judo teams, and preparing professional bodyguards and bouncers.
Jobs where you absolutely do not have time to think about theory or correct your posture.
Right. Under extreme, life-threatening stress involving blinding speed, surprise, fear, and deep fatigue, the conscious cortex of your brain simply cannot process information fast enough to run complex, culturally learned choreography. It shuts down.
The famous saying, right? Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth.
What survives that level of biological chaos is what was never learned in the first place. The inborn reflexes survive. A newly hatched lizard walks perfectly out of the egg and immediately knows how to hunt because the software is inborn, written into the deepest layers of the brainstem. We have that exact same software.
So if your training fights that software.
If your fighting technique or your athletic movement contradicts your natural organization, it will fracture and fall apart under stress. But if your skill is a direct organic extension of the meta-network and the axial wave,
then you have something to fall back on that is millions of years older, infinitely faster, and vastly deeper than any habit you learned in a gym. The chaos of the fight doesn't reach all the way down to the brainstem. The deepest software keeps running.
which brings us to the ultimate synthesis of all these ideas, what Gorelik calls global training.
Global training is the culmination of this entire philosophy. It is the point where the artificial modern boundary between your workout time and your lifetime completely dissolves. Formal training and daily life merge into one single continuous operating system.
Walking to the mailbox, sitting down at a dinner table, reaching up to grab a cup from a cabinet, reacting to catch a falling set of keys, all of it begins to organically reflect these same organizing principles of the meta-network and the fish play form.
Life itself becomes the training ground.
And this is only possible because you aren't mentally forcing artificial exercises upon yourself. You're simply stepping out of the way and letting the inborn pattern exist.
It is wild to think about the implications of this. We are so culturally conditioned to assume that to solve a problem like a physical plateau, we inherently need more. We need more complexity, a new subscription app, a new specialized piece of equipment, a more convoluted spreadsheet-driven periodization schedule. We firmly believe the solution is addition. But the entire thesis of kinegenesis is that the solution is actually subtraction.
We must strip away decades of cultural interference. The bad, fixed postures of modern life, the artificial exercises that actively fight our own reflexes, the belief that tension equals strength. We are subtracting all of that accumulated noise to reveal an ancient, highly intelligent, perfectly efficient architecture that we already share with the dog, the cat, and the lizard.
The physical plateau is not a biological inevitability. It is a man-made consequence of violently overriding our own biology with our culture. And that logic leads to a really fascinating, completely new question. If our physical plateaus are just a result of modern culture suppressing our ancient software, it makes you wonder about the other plateaus we face. What about cognitive plateaus?
That is a brilliant extrapolation.
Hmm.
We know the brain and body are not separate. The nervous system is a single continuum.
Exactly. Think about writer's block or severe creative burnout, or that feeling when you are trying to learn a new language and your brain just refuses to absorb another word. We treat those mental plateaus the same way we treat physical ones. We try to force it. We drink more coffee. We stare harder at the screen. We add more stress. But what if creative burnout is just our brain desperately waiting for a cognitive pandiculation? What if the brain needs a mental yawn, a complete parasympathetic release of focused tension that our productivity-obsessed culture has trained us to suppress?
We treat the human organism as a machine to be hacked, assuming that if we just apply enough raw force, we can optimize output. But biological systems require the wave. They require the expansion and the release to reset the baseline. We might be trapping ourselves in cages made entirely of our own relentless drive for control.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, here is your takeaway for today. The next time you feel it coming, that deep, involuntary yawn that arrives uninvited during a meeting, or that sudden urge to throw your arms back and stretch when you finally stand up from your computer, do not stifle it. Don't politely cut it short because you're in public or you think it looks unprofessional. Pay close attention to the mechanics. Notice the gentle opening in the back of your throat, the slight lift of your chest, the broad expansion of your shoulders, and then just let the wave go exactly where it wants to go. Do not control it. You might just feel the oldest software in your body finally reboot.